Hello everyone, this is the Raymond Wood podcast. We are very excited to bring to you our first episode of the Raymond Wood podcast. Now before we introduce you to our first guest, and we're very excited to announce who it is, just a little bit of an explainer, the reason why we've set up the Raymond Wood podcast. For those guys who are aware of who I am, I've been involved in professional football for over 20 years. I'm on a mission to try and open up football player pathways for players in and around Australia, but also all around the globe. We work with some of the biggest clubs, but we also work with some of the smaller clubs as well. And our goal and our dream and vision is to try and bring some of these experienced coaches, ex-players, current players to the front door of your home so we can ask them questions and get some great insight into the world of football, with the key message of how you can make it as a pro football player. So whether you're a male or a female player going down that journey, or you've got a son or daughter who would like to go down that journey, we're going to hopefully help you over the next 12 months as we bring you some of the most exciting episodes. Now, I believe we've got our first guest on the line, and I'm very excited to introduce you to Greg Brown. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Ray. How are you, mate?
Very good, mate. Very, very good. Now, a bit of an introduction for those guys who may or may not know Greg. Greg's originally from Manchester, from the UK. When he was younger, he was very, very fortunate through a lot of hard work, playing at the youth level at Manchester United. He then went on to have an amazing career coming across to Australia and New Zealand, where not only did he represent New Zealand, but also the Socceroos. And also he went on to coach the Matildas. And his current role, he's currently down in New South Wales as a technical director. So, Greg, welcome to the Raymond Wood podcast. And if you could just give us maybe a little bit of a background, a little bit more detailed background on your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Look, it's a real privilege to be on the first podcast, and I do wish you all the best with it. I know that you're doing a lot of good work, mate, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of great people on, which will be a benefit for your listeners. For me, being at Manchester United as a young boy, I suppose I think when you're little, you don't really, well, some people do. Some people say that they've always wanted to be a footballer, and I certainly wanted to be a footballer, but I never really, I suppose, appreciated where I was when I was at Man United. I was there for 5 years, from 11 to 16, and I just enjoyed the ride. Had some great experiences there, met all the first team players, trained at the famous Cliff training ground with all the best from history. I've trained. I really enjoyed my time there. But at the end, I suppose, and I guess I was a bit naive, I didn't realise that once I got to 16, it was a case of them selecting those out of our group that they wanted to take on as professionals. So I just went along to the final function, which was at the Old Trafford Executive Suite, and at the end of it, they got us in a huddle in the corner and said, "Look, well done, boys. We're going to take Alan and Chris on, and we wish the rest of you all the best." And that was sort of it. It was brutal. I just went, "What do you mean? What? Well, that's it. That's it. See you later," sort of thing. So I just went, okay, and just went back to play with my mates, really. And then a couple of my mates were decent players playing at semi-professional clubs, and they said, "Look, you need to be playing at a higher level." And cut a long story short, one of them recommended me. I went to play my first semi-pro game, was actually in the FA Cup against a team you'd be familiar with, Ray, Burscough. We played Burscough in the FA Cup preliminary rounds, and I scored my first touch. And so that set me on my way to 3 or 4 years playing semi-pro. And then I got an offer out of the blue to go to New Zealand, and the only reason I took it was I'd broken my leg. And again, this is a conversation I have with some of the players. One right now actually who's playing for us just had a really bad injury. Really good player, just on the cusp of maybe, playing at a semi-professional or professional level. He's done his ankle really badly. He's going to be out for probably 10 months. And I was in a similar position when I was I think I was 20. And there was 4 professional clubs looking at me. One had already put money on the table. And I broke my leg in that game that they came to watch. And that put me out for 3 or 4 months, and then another couple of months getting fit. And I only just squeezed in a couple of games towards the end of the season. And so at that stage, Australia and New Zealand played out of sync with the UK. So I went to New Zealand just really to get fit and come back again. But as fate would have it, I got to a club that were bottom of the league in the National League there, but we're still in the cup. We went on a cup run. We won the final. I got man of the match in the final. The next minute, they touted me to play for New Zealand. So I thought, well, this is good. I'll have another year here, which I did. I played for New Zealand. And then I just felt like the standard, and no offense to anyone, I mean, the standard was pretty good. At that stage, New Zealand had just been at the World Cup in 82. This was 85. So they had decent players there, but I just felt I needed more of a challenge. And when I got a chance to play in Australia, I went for that. And again, I was always going to go back to the UK. It was just going to be a case of, I'll go to Australia for a bit and then I'll head back. But, I got here. I did okay again. And next minute, I'm getting tapped up to play for the Socceroos. So, I ended up staying here, and I don't regret any of it. I did have a chance to go and play overseas again. I did actually play in South Korea for a short while. But, I got married, settled down in Australia, and finished my career here.
Now, just in regards to a little bit about, for the listeners, I was never good enough to make it as a pro player. I love football. I really, really loved it. But it was only as I got a little bit older, I realised that I wasn't putting in enough. And that was just due to circumstances at home with mum and dad and not having possibilities to get out and train enough. As you know, I went on a journey, probably through my late teens and early 20s, completing all of my coaching badges. I'd done my UEFA C, UEFA B and A. To go down that journey just to see if talent was born or if it was made. And one of the things that stuck out to me was that I realised quite early on in my early 20s that it is hard work, it is repetition, and it's having the opportunity and the environment to excel. Now, from your point of view, Greg, obviously you did play professional football and you represented nationally. But in regards to maybe making it as a regular first teamer for Manchester United, do you think there was something like, with all the knowledge you've built up over the years in your coaching backgrounds and football career, what do you think would have been maybe that was missing that you probably could add in? So if you're looking back and talking to your 13 or 14-year-old self, what do you think that key thing was missing to maybe make it and sustain a top career in the Premier League?
There's a couple of things. When I was at United, I was a very late developer. I was very small. And a couple of years after United released me, I started to grow. And the coaches then said, you know what, you're as good as... They were saying basically I was as good as the kids that they kept on. But I think my problem was I didn't have any advice around me, Ray. Even though I come from a big footballing family, they weren't professionals. I didn't have a lot of mates who were close to me that could help me or that gave me the right advice. So really, after I finished at United, I should have just gone to another club. I should have gone to one of the, maybe Bolton or Oldham that were big at the time, that were close to Manchester, that were close to me. I could have made contact with them and gone and done some trials, and may just continue on. But I didn't. I just went back playing with my mates, as I mentioned earlier. I didn't really make a go of it. I didn't have the right advice around me. So, it wasn't that I wasn't dedicated enough. I mean, I used to get 2 or 3 buses to train at United when I couldn't get a lift. But when it was over with United, I just thought, well, that's it. I just thought that's, I'm done. I've had a go and it didn't work, and I'll just go and play with my mates. So I didn't have the right advice because, as you know, and as you're trying to, let everybody else know, is that there's lots of different ways to make it to the top. And I found a way, across the other side of the world. And that was more by luck than design, I never had anybody advising me that might be a good stepping stone even. So I didn't have the right advice around me. Obviously, I had some talent, but just didn't have the knowledge or the advice that when I did have a little setback, how to get back on the horse, if you like. So I suppose that was the biggest thing that sort of stopped me kicking on after I left United.
Yeah. Now, just rolling forward, obviously you went on and played for the Socceroos, and that must have been an amazing feeling, pulling that jersey on and representing. Is there one moment when you got opportunities to play for the Socceroos that really sticks out in your mind, and what was that, and why was it?
I was really lucky that my first international was against New Zealand, because you don't at international level, you don't have a lot of time to impress. You need to step up and deliver on straight away at that level. Fortunately for me, we played New Zealand, and I knew all the boys I was playing against, so it was almost like a regular game for me in that respect. I felt confident that I could go into the game and do well. So having that introduction into that first game, I got over those nerves probably a lot quicker than I might have done. And then when I played well against them, I felt confident that I could do a job at that level. The next game was against England, which was, totally different. This was an England side that had just come back or went to the semi-finals in Italy in 1990. The closest they got, I think, since they won it in '66. So playing a very good side. Gary Lineker is the captain. And just walking out into that stadium, there was a real sense of achievement. And then after that, after England, it was like, well, anybody else we played was just, secondary, because obviously England were a top side. So I went on to play against Croatia, who now, big force in the game. They were new to the international scene then. And South Korea, again, another quality country. So the things that stand out for me was just the, as you mentioned, just the pride in the shirt, the respect that you get from other players that and public that you never felt before, and just a real sense of achievement, I suppose. Even though I knew, there's still a way to go at that stage, I just felt that all the hard work and all the travel and all the, I did all this by myself, Ray. I left England on my own. I left Australia on my own. I went to South Korea on my own, and I just felt like all the hard yards in the end, were worth it.
So just rolling on a little bit further ahead, so you finish your football career and you become the Matildas coach. Can you just talk about a little bit how that opportunity arose and where it come from, and sort of how long you were in post at the Matildas, and some of the positives that you took from that opportunity to represent the Matildas?
Yeah, look, I mean, like yourself, I got in at a relatively young age. I finished playing fairly early at 32. I mean, I'd signed a contract with Brisbane Strikers. I could have easily played another 2 or 3 years, but part of the deal was I was coaching the Queensland Academy of Sport. I was the head coach there, and I just felt like I couldn't commit myself to both. Both were like full-time positions, and I just couldn't do it. I had to make a decision, and having spoke to a few of the people I respected in and around the game, I realised that, staying in football, I couldn't really achieve anymore. I knew with the 4-year gap between the World Cup, I knew I probably wasn't going to play for the Socceroos again. I'd done just about everything I could do in the domestic game, and I just thought coaching was my future. So I'd done a full pre-season and then just quit playing and focused on my coaching. That was, I was only 32 then. And I coached the boys at the QAS for a couple of years, and then was asked to take over the women's program as well. So now, I'm like 35, which I did. And once I took over the women's program, I obviously got to meet a lot of the people involved at the high level in the women's game here. And Tom Samani, who was the national team coach at the time, asked me if I wouldn't mind, assisting him. And I thought that'd be great for me in my development, just to sit in behind the national team coach, see how things go at that level. And I did that, but I never actually got to play under him because he left and got a contract in the J League. And so the position was vacant. I applied for it and was given it. So really, in a very short space of time, I've gone from, being a player 4 years later, I'm a national team coach. So I was very young, but I used my experience as a player. And I've got to say, the grounding I had as a coach at QAS was fantastic. Straight away being made aware of the sports science that was available to players, the strength and conditioning. It was all sort of cutting edge at the time. But I was introduced also to all that at a very early age. And so, I took my Matildas job on with a view, knowing that we had the World Cup and the Olympic Games coming up, knowing that it was a huge challenge, but I just dived in. I was there from late 96, early 97 to 99 to the World Cup. And yeah, it was a great experience, a good learning curve, traveling, understanding what it's like to travel with the national team and to get yourself ready for games. Certainly here in Australia, we've got massive distances to travel and get people up for a game, in a few days. The sports science that was behind that. So I learned a lot during that time. I probably was a bit naive with regards to what happens, above, high up in the federations, and with the Sports Commission. I mean, I don't know if we've got time to go into it, Ray, but there was all kinds of politics going on behind the scenes that I probably should have been aware of, but wasn't. And I just carried on doing my coaching naively, thinking that, people would understand. Because, I suppose what I'm getting at is when we went to the World Cup, I actually took a very young side. Alicia Ferguson, I think, was the youngest at the competition. She was 17. Amy Taylor was 18. There was a number of teenagers in that team that played. And the reason behind that was, at the stage, believe it or not, the Women's World Cup wasn't as big as the Olympic Games at that stage. The Olympic Games was the big one, and that was what the focus was. So I tried to blood these young girls in at the World Cup, getting them prepared for the Olympic Games the next year. But because we didn't achieve what was expected from the Sports Commission, there's lots of questions asked about it, and virtually there was only one real option for the sake of the team, and that was for me to step back, because if I knew that we weren't a medal chance at the Olympics. I knew that we'd take a bit of time, but that wasn't the impression that they had, because we did have some really good results. They thought we were a medal chance, and because we didn't qualify through the rounds at the World Cup, they thought, well, something's gone wrong here, which it actually hadn't. But so it was a bit of a learning curve there. Still a great experience, something that I wouldn't have changed. I might have done things a little bit differently, but I think, Ray, when you've got an opportunity, no matter what age you are, if you've got an opportunity, you should go for it, because it might not come again. And even though I believe I know more now, and someone my age is probably a good candidate, at the time, I knew I was young, but I didn't care. I was just fearless, and I just went for it, and I don't regret it.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of the points that you touched on was politics and politics and football, especially in Australia. And as you're aware, I've been in Australia on and off for 17 years, in between coaching in Europe and here. And one thing that really sticks out for me is that I always look at Australian athletes, and they are the best by a country mile in all the sports. But one of the experiences that I've had working with various clubs, being involved at state and federation level, is that it just seems to be, for me, the politics gets involved a little bit too much. And I've just got a strong belief and an opinion that it really is affecting the development of the players in Australia. And going back to my time working in the Premier League and working at Leicester City, our technical director and head of football was an amazing guy, and this guy I hold up there for the knowledge of the game, but more so about how to affect coaches more, which then went on to affect players more. And his name is John Rudkin. And I never forget an analogy he gave me, and he said, and it was to a group of coaches, we were having a coaches meeting, and he said, when we're making a decision in and around the football club, whether it's selling a pork pie, whether we're selling a drink at the game, whether we're selling a match programme, whether we're working on how we develop a player, it should always point back to the one question, whether we should do it or not. Is it in the interest of the development of the players? And that stood out for the youth players and also the senior players, both in the boys and women's side, because I was very lucky to be involved in the boys and the men's and the women's and girls side at Leicester City. And I think that's probably a lesson or a core value that probably not only clubs in Australia, but I think federations should have as the number one, that if it's not in the interest of the player, then we don't do X, Y, or Z. What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
Absolutely, Ray. I mean, that's, going back to when I was a QAS coach, we, being in Queensland, we played in a National Youth League. So we were flying to Sydney. It was mainly only the East Coast, but South Australia were involved as well in the Women's League. But we were flying interstate with these boys. They were training 3 nights a week on the park. They were doing strength and conditioning sessions, a full-time program. It never cost them a penny. Now, today, the better you are, the more it costs you. How does that bode for a good development program? It's ridiculous that we're going backwards, where unfortunately, it's a rich kids game. It's getting to be a rich kids game, and we're missing out on a lot of young boys that are not getting the opportunity. And so, there's all kinds of systemic problems there. Even I've got issues with some of the parts of the curriculum, not so much what's in the curriculum, it's what's not in the curriculum. And in my position, I'm in a fortunate position where I can make decisions, for the interest of the players rather than just following the narrative. So I think there's definitely, and as you identified, problems with the administration of the game, in that the funds aren't being funneled to where they need to be. The A-League, it's in dire straits. There's clubs all over the place really struggling. I believe Brisbane Roar now have not got a youth academy. Where are kids supposed to go? How are they supposed to achieve their goals? Who's looking after them? Who's giving them those pathways? There's something, where I am that we're very conscious of, and I'm lucky I've got a board that are very conscious of that as well. I think in the country areas, it's even more exaggerated, where they've got the lack of competition, lack of opportunity. So for us, we really have to try and, come up with ways of giving the kids a real pathway, something that they can see that they can head towards. So, yeah, I'm with you, Ray, that there's certainly, and look, it's always been the case. I mean, I didn't mention it, but I started the Players Union here in Australia. I was the first president. And the reason that came about was the players weren't being looked after then. It's always been a battle between the players and the administration. They just don't get it. They just don't listen to the players and the coaches, the people who are in the game, that run the game, that are at the grassroots level. And they just feel like they know it all, and they just do things for whatever reason they do it. It's really been that way for a long time. Even in the UK, until the PFA formed, the FA in England were terrible as well. The history there with the PFA in the UK, and it's always been the players and the coaches that have dragged the game up to its professional level, because the administrators just don't seem to understand and don't seem to want to have that discussion either.
Yeah, it's quite upsetting to see, because I've met quite a few amazing people over the years, including yourself, and obviously I know your background a little bit, and that, you know, you were even out the game for so many years because you get frustrated with it. Similar to myself, you know, I've come back from working in the Premier League. I've come back working with and on the Premier League on their EPPP project. I'm working in youth developments in youth phase, and you know, I've approached the federation before many, many years ago saying that, look, there's a lot of knowledgeable and experienced people in the country, and I'm sure if you brought all these people together, they would volunteer the time to help you build a correct pathway for players. And that involves, like, one of the things I really want to touch on and I'm quite strong about is, for me, we rely on volunteers of football clubs in Australia in the NPL and SAP system. And the volunteers are amazing. But for me, the only way we're going to start developing elite players good enough to go and play in the top leagues in Europe consistently, for me, is when it becomes an underpaid employment. So those people in the roles like yourself are in a paid position. I think the problem that you've got is that people work full time, they've got businesses, then they're expected to back up and run a football club with 1,000 players. And I just really feel for the volunteers who are involved. And I think we just need to start working out with a model where there is an elite academy based in every state. We place them strategically all around the country where those elite players can filter through. And guess what? It's free. It's the exact same model. You hit the nail on the head. Why should you be the most elite player in the top 5% for your age group and your mum and dad are expected to pay $4,000, $5,000 a year? It blows my mind. And yet we know in the UK, football's 150 years old against Australia's probably maybe 30 or 40 years old, if we're honest. But it just really upsets me. But then even at the top level, and I won't mention which particular state, but as you know, we run a program called the Pro Player Pathway. We help young players from age 10 to 23 find a pathway that can open up opportunities and help them develop into players. Now, some of these players we've got on our program are in and around state level football. And I went along to a training session in a game a few weeks ago, and I spoke with the parents of the player who we represent and help. And they've got one of these VO cameras up filming the game, and I thought, amazing, like, this is great. So they're filming the game, so I spoke to the player after the game and to the parents, and I said, how often do you do match analysis? And they looked at me and went, what do you mean match analysis? And I said, well, you've got a VO camera, that's what it's for, to analyse the game. Oh no, they just send the video to us. So okay, so they're recording the game, you're paying a huge fee to be representing your state that you live in, and the game is being recorded and it gets sent to you. So when does the coach actually do some of the coaching with you and gives you some tips on how to improve your game, looking at your system? And the player and the parent just laughed at me and said, they don't. They just send us the video link. The coach has never once gone through match analysis. The coach has never once sat down and drew up objectives to help the players get better. And that's why we come up with the Professional Player Pathway program. Because part of that program, not only do we offer scholarships for players all around Australia, for those who want a pathway to the top level, but one of the key areas we identified when we looked in the complaints department was that we discovered that match analysis, and I learned this working in the Premier League, if you were assessing a player properly and objectively, you know what they're good at and what they're not good at, and you can draw that out. So the question I've got to you, Greg, is why have we got at these top level, state level systems and federation, if we got things like cameras set up and coaches aren't doing match analysis with players?
Mate, they're everywhere. VO's everywhere, and for those that are not familiar with it, VO is a system that you video the game, then you just basically plug it into the Wi-Fi. That gets sent to Norway or somewhere, and a computer breaks it down. But it only breaks it down to when there's breaks in a game, so it can identify, a kick-off, a corner, a free kick, a penalty, a throw-in, when the ball's dead, and then starts again. That's basically all it does. So the coach then has to go, even though, when I've done video analysis, when I was back at BBC, or even, other places. I did the video analysis, so I was the one who cut and pasted it for the appropriate times in the game that I wanted to, talk to the players about. So VO, it breaks it up, but it doesn't really do the analysis for you. The coach has to do that. And then you get back to, okay, when does the coach have time to do it? Going back to your point, the coach isn't full time. He just videos the game, sends it to the kids. He hasn't got time to sit down, look at it, go through it with the individuals, and I know what you're saying, the kids are paying money, but, again, the coach, even though he's probably being paid, he's not full time. He's got to be doing all this in his own time. So, I could, I can see it from both sides. I can see, that the video's there, but it's not doing the job that we think it is there to do. It's a computer that breaks it down. It's not the coach. So it's not really doing an analysis. It's just basically a video of the game. And you can skip to a goal, as a coach, you can skip to the goal and say, look, guys, there's the goal. This is why it happened. But all that play in between is not being actually analysed. And that's the most important bit. How do you get to the ball in the position to get it to goal? How do we stop them getting in the position to score their goal? All that lead-up play on the VO system is not being analysed. And unless you just take the raw data, the raw footage, and then analyse it yourself. So I think a lot of coaches will see that as an easy fix. Oh, the computer does it all for you. Yeah, but it doesn't actually do what you want it to do. It just breaks the game up in a little bits for you. It doesn't actually do any analysis. Like, it doesn't give you any stats or anything like that. So, yeah, look, video analysis is a massive part of the game. A picture paints 1,000 words. To be able to show the kids, look, there you are. Look, see how you got caught out of position there. That's why we need you to sit in. You should have pushed out. You're nearest to the ball. You're standing off instead of going. All these things, you can have a conversation with a kid, but if you're showing him on a video, then there's no denying it. He can't argue with you. It's there. And that's why video analysis is everywhere, because it's so important.
It is, and that's like one of the reasons why with our pro player pathway, when we do our match analysis for our players, we drill down that deep. It's not analysing the team, it's analysing the individual. And going back again, when I was very fortunate to work for Carlo Ancelotti at Paris Saint-Germain, the way they put match analysis across was amazing, especially in the youth development sector. And they said, really, the match analysis is more not just about analysing the players individually to drive out objectives, but it's also to give you as a coach a different perspective. And you've just said it paints so many different pictures when you're watching it. And you actually, as a coach, start to see the game differently. And you actually start to see your players differently. And one of the things that we got to do when we were at Leicester, when we analysed matches for the youth players, so as an example, Luke Thomas, who I was very fortunate to work with for a few years, we would particularly just analyse one player for that week and give them that valid feedback. And that feedback could be the difference in them getting kept on at the end of the year or not and going back to basics. But also, what was really interesting as well, I think for me, it's a bit of a cultural thing at the moment. I think everyone wants everything now. Everyone needs it this second. Everything's too easy. You can get in an Uber, you can get food delivered to your door. And I think, unfortunately, this has gone across into the sport. And why I mean that is that, like, they just put cameras up for the sake of having a camera because it ticks a box. They're giving coaching certificates out because they need to have so many A-licensed coaches. And I think if we really look, I mean, as an Australian now, I've been here for 17 years, I'm an Australian passport holder. I just look at it and I just think we just need to go back to basics and firstly ask, okay, what's the benefit of having a camera? It's going to record the game. Okay, are we going to do a match analysis? Yeah, we are. Okay, is that going to benefit the players? It will. But if we go back a level, we've got a camera we've spent $2,000 on. Do we do match analysis with it? No. How about we spend that $2,000 then on maybe giving the coach some more money to do a few extra hours rather than having the camera sat there. If we've got these tools, we need to use it. And I think in turn, we're gonna start developing better players. Now, just moving on a little bit, Greg, in relation to the successful World Cup, we both attended games in the Women's World Cup and we're very fortunate to attend the final with you. Just a little bit about the success of not just the Matildas, but also about the women's game, and how pleasing is it for you to see the growth in the women's game, being the ex-Matildas coach?
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be in this country when this, without doubt, the most successful Women's World Cup was being played out. I loved every minute of it. I devoured every game, every second of it as that I could. I was just really fascinated with the way that the game's been being developed, the different styles of play, and being able to go and actually watch them live was fantastic as well. There was a bit of nervousness around having 32 teams. Is there enough quality there? We're going to have these massive scores, but they weren't there. The games were well fought. A lot of, very competitive tactically. They were very aware. Some of these teams are going up against the giants. I mean, America being knocked out was just, unbelievable. Norway, giants gone. Brazil, giants gone out. It was just fascinating. And to your point, Ray, the women's game's come a long way. I was doing another podcast the other day, and they were asking me they pulled up one of the stats that I think when I was the Matildas coach, I think my team had the record in a World Cup game. We won 21-0 in a World Cup qualifier, and they were asking me about that, and it was, that's it. Those scores will never happen again. The game has come a long way. You're now getting professional coaches, and it's all come back to funding, right? It's all come back to these federations saying, we're going to put money into this. They're going to have, professional coaches. They're going to have proper facilities. The girls are going to be able to train full time. And once you do that, of course, the standard goes up. Of course, everything goes up. Professionalism, is there for everyone to see. So it's been a real eye opener, I think, for 90% of the world. Who didn't think that the women's game could be that competitive and that interesting. And you have to see it for what it is. Women are not men, but they certainly, some of the technique. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Optus did the goals of the tournament. Oh my God, Ray. You're talking top corner, from 20, 30 meters on an angle, straight in front, right foot, left foot. I mean, some of the saves were world class. There's real quality there. And I think people who may have thought twice about going to a women's game might decide, that they'll give it a go. Certainly at that level, because it was just a real joy to watch.
Yeah, it was really interesting you touched on that. I think we had the same conversation at the game in Sydney a few weeks ago, and we're very fortunate that we covered a lot of the top games in Europe and in the Premier League, and we went to the Champions League final this year to watch Manchester City beat Inter Milan. And that was, as amazing as it was, something just resonated with me when we were in Sydney, and it was the atmosphere in the restaurant and bar we were in. I think Scotty with the drums helped that. Like the atmosphere outside, going into the game, even like the people we were speaking to, we were very fortunate to go in there. The corporate hospitality, thanks to FIFA, and the people we met, and even just the buzz around the game. And it wasn't because it was England in the final and Spain. There was just something about it. And my takeaway from that was, I look back to my time when I coached Leicester City's women's team, and we helped them get promoted back into the WSL. It was over like 12 years ago. And I'll be honest, like the standard of the players then compared to now, and even like just that game for me, that World Cup final, the Women's World Cup final, was better and bigger than the Champions League final in June. And that, when I looked at that, I just realised, like, why is that? And for me, it was quite simply what you just said. It's the amount of investment that's gone into the clubs. I mean, going back to your old club, Manchester United, they didn't have a women's team 4 or 5 years ago. And now they're like one of the leading teams. And I mean, you know, look at the goalkeeper for England. I mean, she's a Manchester United player. She's like the best goalkeeper in the world at the moment. Can you imagine if Manchester United didn't put in that women's team? We mightn't have seen that performance across a World Cup. So I think hopefully Australia maybe learn from this, that the small amounts of money that's being invested into the women's game globally, imagine if we just invest some of that into the youth system in Australia. But before you invest it and you're ticking boxes, why don't you speak to people who've been in the system, who've played at the top level and know what works and how to do it? And I think if they take the right people on, have a think tank of volunteers, but they've got to offer and bring something to the table. You've been involved in youth development at the top level. You've coached at the top level. And if you offer something, get all those people around in a room, and I think we'll all come to the same consensus. It's funding and it's making it for the top level players in any age group. It's free of charge. They doesn't need and they shouldn't be a cost.
No, I think, you know, getting back, you know yourself, Ray, you were in France. You know, Clairefontaine initially was a standalone sort of national hub for football, but now you've got these satellite programs all around the country in the regions. Say with the AIS here, the AIS for the athletes was the hub. Then you had Queensland Academy of Sport, Victoria Institute of Sport, SASE. They're doing it right. That's what we need in our sport. We need a hub for the national team, like a training home, like St George's Park in the UK. And then you need them in each state. So the best kids can go to the best, you know, the best facilities, get the best coaching. And that's the start. You know, it needs government funding. And what, you know, what I hope is happening, but I doubt very much it is. I mean, we saw, you know, the Prime Minister Albanese at the games with the Matildas. We saw Jamie Johnson standing next to him. I hope he's saying, you know, Prime Minister, we need funding. We need our home. Football needs a home, and we need a home in each state. You know, we need to develop these players, and we need them to have somewhere to go where they can get the best coaching and the best facilities and the best treatment, so they understand what they need and they can find a place to develop. Without that, you know, we're just treading water, and we're not even treading water, we're sinking slowly.
Yeah. No, I think just to finish that point off, I think you're right. I think we've got the MPL and SAP system, which is amazing in itself. Then we've always had like that QAS or AIS up there, but I think the gap in the middle has been missing. And it's quite simply what you've said. You have satellite venues where your SAP and MPL players are in a paid system, but they're with professional coaches who are in full-time positions. Those players will then feed in to your top national training centre where the best of the best go. And, you know, you've only got to look at England, look at the investment, because they got slammed originally when they set up St George's Park. But St George's Park was probably paramount in the success because they knew you could see there was levels. It was, you know, your SAP, your MPL system, which is sort of similar in the UK. Then you've got your state representation. Then you've got that national level. And I think we're missing 2 levels in the middle. And I think, you know, this is where we need to be going. Now, before we finish off, I was listening to TalkSport in the UK. I love listening to it, and I know you do on occasions. And they were talking about the success of the Matildas. And there was a really interesting point that was raised. And a guest actually phoned in and actually said that they believe the reason why the Matildas are so successful is because 80% of them are plying the trade in the UK and in England with some of the top WSL teams. Do you believe that's got sort of grounding?
Absolutely. If you look at the men's game, the golden generation, you know, Mark Viduka, Harry Kewell, Craig Moore, they all played in the top level in the UK. And that's not happening anymore. And the reason it's not happening, Ray, is if you look at our Joeys, the under 17s were always in the World Youth Cup. They were always in and around the finals. We're not even qualifying for the World Cup now with the 17s. So it just shows that the development of the game has been neglected. And this has happened ever since the AIS and the QAS and all them are now not funding football anymore, because they gave that mantle to the so-called professional clubs in the A-League, and the A-League have just not given the attention that it's needed. And so now there's this generation of kids that haven't had that support. And we're seeing it in our youth teams. I mean, we scraped through by the skin of our teeth to get to the World Cup. We did brilliant when we got there, but I really am concerned about the next few years, whether we're going to make the World Cup again. We haven't got our top players playing in the top leagues like we used to do.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's really, really scary, and it's upsetting to see it at the way it's going, and they're not actually looking at it. Like one of the programs that we spoke about that we offer at Euro Football Star is that professional player pathway, because we identified that there is no pathway for players, because they don't recognise the fact that for players to be world class, it's all around the environment that they're in, not necessarily about the coach they're with. And you know yourself, if you're in a group of 16 players and you're the best player, that's a problem. But also, if you're in that middle of the group and that development is identified properly, you're going to just be nurtured alone by your teammates, because you're getting pushed physically, technically, and tactically. And that's one of the reasons why we open up opportunities for players to go over to the UK and Europe. And the reason we do it is because we place them strategically, whether it be with a Man City or, with all due respect, to a Harrogate Town or Southport or Beerscombe. The idea is to get that Australian player into the system. Once they're in the system and they're plying the trade against stronger players, we know in the UK the identification system's stronger, and they can start to filter up through the system. We don't have that, unfortunately, in Australia. And one of my biggest upsets is that I see is the age relative effect, where players are not able to play up age groups. It's easier to get a signed letter from the King of England than it is than get a technical director to sign and authorise a player to play up an age group. And I mean, going back to Manchester United and Everton, you only think back to Wayne Rooney when he made his debut for Everton at the age of 15 and scored the winning goal against Arsenal. Now, again, imagine if he didn't get that opportunity. Wayne Rooney wouldn't have went on to become arguably one of the best strikers Manchester United's ever had. Quote me, but I think he won everything in the game.
Yeah, he top goal scorer at Man United, top goal scorer in England at the time. Just got pushed as high as they just pushed him and played him, give him every chance to do that. In the old days, Ray, you just needed a development officer. Didn't even have to be the technical director of the state, just had to be the development officer. If he assessed the boy or the girl and said, yep, he's okay to play up, that's all you used to have to do. And they played up. Where I am, we have kids playing up. It's not a problem. But I know, around the country, it's not always the same. But yeah, look, the idea is you get the best players playing together at the highest level they can play. Simple as that.
And that's the thing I don't think we realise in Australia. We've got the system, we've got the split of the age groups. It's just about being honest and identifying. And one of the areas that I get, because we do the pro player pathway, and we do get a lot of the SAP and MPL players and a lot of the stronger players coming in. We've got girls who are part of the programme who are at QAS in New South Wales, and they're all over. But again, it's like the thing I say to mums and dads is that if your son or daughter is the best player in the squad or in the top 2 or 3, that is a big, big warning sign for me. Because when I was in the Premier League, we worked on a project called the EPPP, and the Premier League spent £1.6 billion on this project, identifying why England weren't developing talent. And one of the areas we identified was, if you're in a squad of 16 or 15 players and you're the strongest player, you actually become the coach within the session. And what that means is you're pushing and challenging everyone else below you, but no one's actually pushing and challenging you, and it hinders your development. And the great example I can finish on this is Harvey Barnes. He was at Leicester City, and he was at the under-14s when I had the under-12s, and he was completely standout. And we discovered this through the Premier League findings, that once you've got these really strong players, to stop his development being hindered, we actually gave him an opportunity 2 nights a week to go up and not just play 15s, but he trains with the 16s. So he was training 2-3 times with his own age group where he was killing it, and that was giving him confidence because he could ply his trade. But then those 2 sessions a week, he was allowed to go and struggle and fail. And when he was allowed to struggle and fail, his development kicked on. Now, I look at Harvey, who's now since signed for Newcastle United, now arguably one of the richest clubs on the planet and probably soon to be one of the most successful. And he's had an amazing career. And it's like, I look back and think to Harvey, if we wouldn't have given him an opportunity to train up in them age groups, we both know he wouldn't have made it. And it's, again, you know, the amount of times over my time as being a technical director, I've spoken to the federation, I've tried to get authorization to get players to play up. And they're like, you need to get it authorised and signed off. And it's like, well, with all due respect, the guy who's got to authorise it has never developed a Premier League star. And he doesn't hold the same qualifications or experience. So surely there should be a little bit of a leeway and trust in me when I say Greg or Tony or Sarah should be playing up an age group because that's going to benefit their development. And I think we need to learn and look at some of those issues that we've got in the game. And I think it's only going to help us.
Made the kids of the future, and if we don't look after them, the future looks bleak.
Yeah, I think the key takeaways as we just close off for me is probably around that point that John Rudkin at Leicester City brought to me and all the coaches, and I'll never forget it, is that if it's not in the interest of the player, then we don't do it. And we can framework that question to any decision we're trying to make in football in Australia. And I think if we're honest with that, it'll really, really help. Just give us sort of one key takeaway from you as well, Brownie, just from today's discussions to finish on.
Well, I think, you know, what we've done is highlight the fact that the pathways they're not here in Australia. They're just not developed properly. They were here. Even then, at the best, they were perfect, but they were good. You know, you had the Queensland Academy of Sport, Victoria Institute of Sport, South Australia Sport Institute, all giving kids the best coaching they can get for free, playing in the best competition you can get, and then supplying those kids into the National League as it was then. That was a decent system, a decent pathway, but that's gone now. So, you know, we really need to find better ways.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. And just to finish, on everyone who's been listening in, we really thank you for joining our first The Raymond Wood podcast ever, and we're going to be bringing some amazing podcasts to you over the next couple of weeks. Again, we did mention that I do run a company called Euro Football Star. We do run a program called the Professional Player Pathway, and that's where we've identified sort of all the gaps in the market within Australia and how to open up those pathways for players. We do give away in excess of $300,000 worth of places and scholarships. So if you've got a son or daughter who loves the game, whether they be 10 years of age or they've been involved for many years, we work with players 10 to 23. All you've got to do, guys, in the notes below to the podcast, we put all our information, the website and my email address, and you can reach out to me personally. But for anyone who wants to make a note of it, it's info, which is info, at eurofootballstar.com. So everyone listening in, a big thank you from the Raymond Wood podcast. And Greg, it was a pleasure having you on. And hopefully when we get to our 100th podcast, which will be in the next year or two, will you join us again?
Absolutely. Before that, if you need me, mate.
Cheers, Greg. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thank you.